question is, when do you feel most alive?
Most
alive.
When I'm laughing.
Remind me, you
Helen.
When you're laughing. Does that happen a lot?
Yeah.
With your children?
I was thinking exactly the same thing, when your kids make you laugh.
Oh, for you?
Yeah.
That's lovely. Have there been periods of time when you've had to remind yourself of that? Or is laughter a constant for you?
Pretty much.
She's laughing.
She's a hysteric.
Because I work, it's a good thing it is pretty much daily. All that I do.
What's that work?
People got eating disorders.
Okay. Do you want to go this way? Since we were talking about laughter.
I just think the same thing. I think my kids are hilarious. I can laugh quite a lot.
At the moment.
At the moment. Yeah. I suppose like Helen, that some of the work I do is quite difficult, but we quite often find a space for laughter within it, and I think that's really important. Sometimes it can be quite dark humour, but I think it's it's important to try and find the joy in that, and I think you do manage it quite often.
And what's the work you do?
I work for Bridging the Gap in Gorbals, so combination of refugees and people in Gorbals, some of whom are really struggling.
Yeah. And remind me your name?
Katrina.
Craig. Three things. The first thing that came to mind was actually sex.
Oh God.
It's not as good as being with your children when they're laughing. That one. Playing music and being on journeys like we did the West Highland Way, that type of thing. Just when you're doing a sort of lengthy bit of journey and seeing new things, probably being in nature, seeing the built environment. But mainly sex.
If only, dear.
I know. Well,
you might laugh, Craig.
You mean a lot to me, dear.
Susan, I think maybe similar to Helen. I was thinking at things like family worship, just engaging with the kids, and I think that's partly because if they appear to be engaging, they probably are, because they're not going to do that out of politeness. It's very obvious if you've lost them. That's it. If you are getting something back, it's because you are making some kind of connection. I think that's.
I forgot this was being filmed. I better warn you all.
You got consent forms as well.
I can edit it if you want to take it out.
Rachel, I think the two things that came to me were when I've taken physical exercise, and it might be sex, it might not. I was just saying that because I was swimming this morning, and I was when I came out of the baths, sometimes I really hate swimming, and it's such a bore, but afterwards you just feel great, and I love to go a walk, and I feel great if I go to yoga. That's sort of the physical thing makes me feel really good. But I also was thinking that I don't know whether it's when I get my damned ideas in my head, but it's like when I'm in flow or something, you know, just got a lot of things seem to be falling into place in my head and ideas going forward. I love that too.
Martin, I suspect some of it is about laughter, but some of it, I suspect, is also about being alongside those who are struggling for dignity.
I really identify with when you're part of something where when the people that come in didn't have what's generated, you know, and that came by being together, and also this feeling of being part of something in flow and precipitating things. And I also at the moment have a type of aliveness which I can have in Anglican worship or Russian Orthodox, but I have it at the moment with some of the recent songs by Leonard Cohen and the one You Want It Darker. I just find that have many people heard it? Well, he uses some Jewish chants in it, as well as imagery and words, you know, that resound into things that we all know about. And for me, there's something in that type of space that brings me very alive.
Donnie? Cycling, mostly. Don't know, maybe it's a love affair with your bicycle, or there's something about cycling that's really nice. And I think it's very interesting you say the flow thing, because I do think that, especially with other people, just sometimes it just all seems to fall into place, and it's kind of very good.
Yeah.
Sarah, I agree about the cycling. I love being out on my bike very much and miss it very much this time of year when I get a bit feared in the dark. But yeah, I completely love being on my bike, and that vibe of walking and journeying, you know, like, particularly like by ABCD. Really like walking and being outside. And also, this is getting a bit of a theme with everyone else. I think that where you know, particularly if you've been getting flow with something where you've been, well, where I don't like that word's been used before, but where you get you've been struggling and getting things are not quite working, and then they work, and that's really satisfying. I work in I'm a lawyer and I work in immigration law and I teach it, and it's just been a crap year for that. It's really crap, and every now and again you get, you know, you get something that's a bit okay, and it's just fantastic, and it's a bit okay.
That's kind of Scottish thing, isn't it?
No,
It's
well,
not bad.
no, it's not, but it's just been crap.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's that, and yeah, and I think also for me listening to music sometimes. So.
Rachel? A few as well. One is a sort of combination of sensory and laughing as well, so sledging actually, because you get a right good laugh, you get a bit of exercise, and it's cold and you're looking forward to the hot chocolate, and it's that kind of anticipation and the sense of the cold as well. It's all in a one, like I feel really like them.
Another would be getting a chance to be creative. I really enjoy that, whether it's designing a room in the house or getting to do arty-farty stuff or other things. I really enjoy that too. There was something else, but it's gone now.
I think for me it's having friends around for a meal and having spent a whole afternoon cooking.
That was it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a joyous thing, and then people come and chatting to each other. So I love it. I love performing as well. I do a fair bit of poetry performance, and I really enjoy the energy of that. But it's an energy that's a thrill and then a slump, whereas I think if I had to choose, I'd choose the lovely energy of having friends around for a meal, because that isn't about the thrill and the slump. That's about something that's slow brewing. It's a question, I suppose, that comes from an Ignatian point of view. Ignatius of Loyola talks about the glory of God being found in a human being fully alive, and he stole that from Irenaeus of Lyon, and Irenaeus of Lyon probably stole it from somebody else. So, and I love that idea that glory is found in a human being fully alive, and the glory of God is found in that. I used to think of glory as something maybe like a fountain or a sparkle or a phosphorescence or a waterfall, something magnificent. But when you think of the experiences that we've described, everything from something that's utterly ordinary, something that's depends on there being snow for sledding, things alone, things together, all of those things have the quality of glory about them, which is much more sophisticated than just a waterfall. And we are the location for that. And I think in the context of a year where there might be personal situations for individuals, but then it's been a difficult year globally, I think, because of what has been tolerated on the public sphere or in the public square regarding what passes for political dialogue, what has been tolerated in terms of what passes for democracy, and what passes for decisions that are supposed to be a way forward that just seem to split people. And I know Scotland, that hasn't been a story that's only limited to this year, and different people will have voted different ways, I'm sure. But those things can cause the opposite of feeling fully alive. And I suppose a question for quiet reflection, which I won't be asking you, is to think about, in as much as you can notice when you feel fully alive, what do you like when you're feeling a bit dead? Is a question to ask. And we each might have habits that we slip into, ways of being with ourselves, with others, wearinesses and tirednesses that we carry and project around the place. And the question is, what therefore is a spiritual practice? And how is it that we can meet the Gospels, and how can the Gospels meet us in the context of a time like this? With that. And what is a way, not just because we want everything to be grand, and not in a way of putting blinkers on, but in a way of having a firm and resolute discipline to nurturing life. How is it that we can nurture life as part of that discipline, and to bring that as part of our mark of defiance into the world? Not to deny what else is happening, but to know this is what is giving me life here. We were speaking, as you and I, a bit about Leonard Cohen, and that part of Leonard Cohen's defiance was to say, I will face the darkness and I won't run from it. And in the darkness there is light and life. And that for him, I think, was an extraordinary defiance towards a world that sometimes had been horrific in terms of his own community. So that's what we're going to think a little bit about tonight. The text that I thought we could turn to, and we might read it in a while, but first of all perhaps we could tell it to each other in whatever order we remember it in, is the last chapter of the Gospel of John. So Jesus has resurrected, and he's come and appeared among the disciples, and they put their hands in his side, and then Peter has decided that he wants to go fishing. So, do people recall that chapter? You can share it with each other. Try to recall it. And then don't read ahead yet. Just see what it is that we can tell each other in terms of the word that lives among us first. And if you want to add in extra bits, you're very welcome. It's always interesting to hear those. And then we'll read the text and reflect on where it speaks to us.
So always doing Barbie on the beach.
Yes. Where Jesus does the Barbie on the beach. Yes, Jesus turns Australian.
Awesome fish, isn't it?
Is that when Peter's asked to cast the net out the other side of the boat,
Yeah.
but he didn't catch anything, and Jesus shouts, try the other side?
Yes.
That would have been very irritating, I think. Wouldn't it?
And I'm trying to remember, he realises, it's not the one where he realises who's talking to him
Mm.
and starts to walk on the water
So,
until he gets self-conscious.
yeah, so that last chapter of John it does have some similarities to that story,
Yeah,
but this
it's
isn't
not
the
that
one where he walks in the water now.
No.
Quite the opposite.
So they fill out the boat with phenomenal amount of fish, so
Yeah.
it's just about sinking.
Yeah.
Mm.
157 of them, it seems. They give this really peculiar number.
Was it not 153?
There you
Because
go.
I went to a
Okay.
club when I was young. So it was at a church called St Peter's, and we had the 153 club
Oh,
because it was that number.
yeah, well there you are.
They had 4 more in their club. We were allowed 153 in.
It does seem to be a direct commentary on the story, or maybe not does seem to be, but I like to think of it as a commentary on the story where Peter walks, because in this instance he just dives in.
Oh yeah, he splashes, he just jumps out the boat.
Mm.
Yeah.
And Jesus doesn't eat, does he? He doesn't eat the fish.
Doesn't seem like it. Yes, there is fish in the barbecue. Yeah. It isn't, yeah.
Is it there that it also says that there were lots more things happening?
Yeah, it's in that same
Get
chapter.
it all in the book.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lovely piece, and that the world couldn't contain all the books. It's a gorgeous. I love that piece of hyperbole at the end of the story.
Is that a bit where he says about feeding the sheep and feeding the
Yes.
lambs and kind of helps Peter with the get over the denial bit, like
Yeah,
saying
Yeah.
what to do.
Gosh, all that happens in that chapter.
Any other things you can recall?
Is Jesus on the shore actually, he is actually cooking fish? Yeah.
Yeah, even before they drag them in. Yeah. Peter turns and looks at the beloved disciple and asks questions about the beloved disciple. And Jesus says, if I want him to live till I come back, do you know, what problem is it of yours? Essentially. And then there's that funny little explanation to say, he didn't say that this man was going to live until he came back. He said, if. So you always think that the community are kind of trying to address some little cultish version of that story that has been emerging, and they're trying to go, no, you know, it was just an illustration. Maybe like Alanis Morissette, it's just irony.
Predicts the way that Peter's going to die.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is that he says now.
When you were older, people will take you and
Oh,
take you to where you do not want to go.
Yeah, when you were, didn't they say when you were young you used to strap your belt around you and go wherever you wanted?
And now that you're old, you will be taken.
So he gets that sort of therapy and 3 times feed my sheep, but then he gets that.
Yes. Will we read it? Do you have a Bible here?
Sorry.
Just wanted to read it.
So it's John chapter 21. I'll read a few verses and then does somebody else want to read a few and pass it on? I know not everybody likes reading, but so take it if you want and read 3 or 4 verses and then pass it on. After these things Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing.
Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish.
That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "Is it the Lord?" "It is the Lord," even. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the lake. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off.
When they had gone ashore,
Do you need glasses? Try those.
I can't see it. Deterioration.
When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord.
Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead.
When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He then said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you."
Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this he said to him, "Follow me."
Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me."
So the rumour spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?
This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written.
So, I think this text, I was thinking about it after Craig wrote to me and was saying what your theme has been for the year. And I think this text might have something to say in terms of what are some spiritual practices and some ways of thinking about God and Jesus of Nazareth and us and prayer and habits and what we do to feel alive and favourite places when things are difficult. Because we see a whole variety of things going on in this. I've got some things that strike me as I've been thinking about it, but I suppose I'm more curious first of all to think, as you think about what your theme is for the year, was there any echo or any question or thought or response that you had as you heard that text and think about the text in terms of the conversations you're having for 2016? Anything you see or anything that speaks to you?
I found that sort of therapeutic interaction between the two very strong, in that it seems that Jesus is saying to him, well Peter says to him, "You know I love you, okay, I fucked you over, but I love you." And I kind of sense Jesus going, "Yeah, that's right, that's okay. A terrible thing happened, but it's okay."
So I think he still almost gives him a choice at the end. You could see it as, if you follow me, this is the death that you face.
Yeah.
And you can still choose not to.
Yeah.
And he still does it as that kind of proof.
Yeah.
There's a lovely wee bit, I think, in there where Peter, you kind of see Peter as a finished article, because Jesus kind of says, "Do you love me more than these?" And Peter at that point is happy to say, "I love you." He doesn't kind of say, "I love you more than them." He just says, "I love you." But then later on, with John, he goes back to a sort of model of, well, what about him? So, and actually that feels quite reassuring.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it is reassuring.
There's also, I mean, one of the things that's just struck me is that Jesus doesn't say, I know that you denied me 3 times, but I also know you love me. He actually, I've always heard it, I think I've changed the way I'm hearing it. So I've always heard him saying, do you love me, as, and Peter's response as Peter, as Jesus testing Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. So I'm kind of passing the test. But actually, what might be happening is that Jesus is giving Peter the opportunity to actually realize something in himself, that he does love Jesus, that he's able to affirm something about himself.
Jesus is letting him heal himself.
Yeah.
And that given this is post-resurrection, that's more important than his relationship, in some ways, than his relationship. I'm going to struggle with this again. But, you know, it's Jesus appearing to the disciples as if he had not, you know, that he's living it himself. He's living himself with the resurrected Jesus, but he's doing it himself. He's beginning to get used to it, doing it himself, rather than doing it through a relationship with the living man. And that is the important thing to do, both in times of doubt and in times of faith. And he keeps, you know, I think there's something there about doing it even when it's difficult, and he doesn't. You know, times of doubt and also in times of faith. Because then when he does believe, it becomes real. That's when he's alive. With Jesus being alive. Struggling again now, but you know, with the alive with the resurrected Jesus.
On a slightly over-realistic level, I did also think, I wonder what Jesus then looked like. He must have looked different. Because if that was any one of us, dealing with any other one of us that happened to die, we would know exactly who they were. You know? It's not like we would have allowed our brains to become so kind of overwhelmed by the possibility that you can't be there, that we wouldn't be able to see them. So there is part of me that just kind of goes, absolutely. But I do that a lot with the Bible.
I've understood it.
Yeah, of course.
Is part of it that you're saying the relationship he had with basically an ordinary person, Jesus, who is just like everybody else.
But he loves him.
Yeah, there's a kind of he's got to get used to loving him in a different way or something.
Something like that. Yeah, it's something like I think what you had said.
Realizing something.
You said you and Craig were talking about it just before I said that, and you were saying he affirms it in himself. So he's that feeling has become part of himself, and so it's. I'm not saying it's there all the time, or he's able to feel it all the time, but he's recognising he's it and feeling it. Is what I was trying to say.
Over the last couple of weeks, you know, in Richard Rohr's stuff, he's been talking about the point of the purpose of religion in the first half of life and the purpose of religion in the second half of life. And he's saying that the purpose of religion in the first half of life is to build up a valued sense of yourself, so that you feel worthy and you feel, you know, you're an individual, you're a person who can cope and get on with life. Whereas the purpose of religion in the second half of life is to destroy that again and say we're all part of the whole. So I wonder if there's something sort of resurrection and post-resurrection that's sort of reflected in that, you know, before Peter's this guy who depends on his buddy, you know, after Jesus is here saying to him, your job now is to feed my sheep, be part of the whole. Forget, you know, your struggle to be yourself now. You are yourself, forget it.
I was having a simple little thought about boats and fish and stuff. You know, there's Peter fishing and he knows his job. He's confident about it, but he's not pulling in the fish, and he has to have some insight that he needs to put his nets over the other side, and you know, I think that's sometimes something that's very hard for us to do when we're set in our ways and confident that we have a sort of valid way of working. Sometimes that needs a bit dismantled as well.
I was thinking about that, but just in the way that I find that quite often when you're wrestling with something and you just can't see your way out of it, there's a sudden shift, and it's something quite simple. It's almost like a change in perception that God gives you, and that the answer's often quite close by or quite simple, but you've just
you
not.
Can't believe how obvious.
You can't believe how obvious it was. So like just chuck your neck out the other side of the boat, and the one you've been.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. Now you come to mention that. Yeah.
It's also like humility too, isn't it? And they actually did do it, and they were the experts. Some geezer on the beach said, "I'm sorry."
You're a fucking joiner. What are you talking about?
You know. I've been fishing these like man and boy.
I was reading it in the last while, thinking about your group and thinking about that invitation to think about what are the things that you can do during a difficult time. And I found myself thinking that Peter, in a difficult time, goes back to what he knows, which is fishing, something that he thinks he's good at, and can go, look, if I haven't made a success of following this fella around Galilee for these years, well, I can do something that I am a success at, although even that still turns out to be hollow, because they catch nothing. It's interesting that Peter says, I'm going, and then all these other ones follow. Thomas, Nathaniel, his 2 sons of Zebedee, and then 2 others, so 7 more follow him. Maybe it's 4, 6, I'm not good at counting. But it almost looks like Peter might be trying to escape from this leadership role that he has either taken or been given. We don't really know. Nonetheless, he's in it. He's got some kind of role as spokesperson. He's the most developed character of all the disciples across the 4 texts, really. He's the one whose personality comes across and whose preferences and a few of the ways of being that he has. It's no wonder lots of people have feelings about him, because he's the one that's given most characterization time by any of the 4 writers of the texts. And I always think that I wonder, is he trying to actually escape everybody else? Is he trying to escape leadership? And they're like, we will follow. I want to be alone. I don't want this. And I think that in a certain sense this is Peter needing to face his own problem of betrayal that we heard about, and his own potential. And I would guess, if he's anything like what I think we're like, he found problems with both. Problems with his problems and problems with his potential. And that can be a difficult thing to know to live with both. So you just want to go, I just want to watch Netflix or go fishing or whatever it is that you go, I can be successful at this, you know, this is predictable, this is knowable. And then they catch nothing. And there, it must have been complicated to have heard, cast your nets on the right side, and you'll find some. There's a whole question about who recognizes whom. And the disciple whom Jesus loves, or who loved Jesus, recognizes Jesus and says it is the Lord. And in direct contrast to other times where Peter is kind of like, oh, get out of my boat, I'm a sinful man, or let me walk on the water, or, you know, these kind of grand statements of all kinds of things. Peter is naked, and he grabs his clothes. Some of the texts and translations says he was stripped for work, and so, but he isn't interested anymore in the grand gift, walking, the miraculous. He just dives in. This isn't anymore about anything to do with the pizzazz of faith, or the you're not looking for something that is about your reputation anymore. It's much rawer. It's at the core. There's no pretense. And I do think it lines up with some of the stuff Richard Rohr says about getting in touch with core needs, knowing what's going on and not performing yourself. Peter here knows himself and knows his relationship enough. Anyway, so then he comes up. And I think a difficult time brings you in touch with your needs, and we're less interested in the cosmetics and much more interested in going, I want something substantial in that way. I want something that's going to be of value and of worth here, is to make you go, what matters? What really matters? What is important in a life? In a personal life, in a family or community life, in a civic and political and religious life also. What is genuinely important? I heard it when Nicola Sturgeon, the day after Brexit, when Nicola Sturgeon spoke words that I hoped loads of people would speak, in terms of saying who was welcome. It's not so moving. I don't know if you've read the San Francisco Chronicle in the last couple of days. Beautiful, beautiful statement about inclusion in San Francisco. A really stunning piece of political and rhetorical artistry in terms of saying the quality and the commitment and the nature of a city of refuge and inclusion. And there's defiance in that, but it's not just defiance. It comes from going, this shit matters, and I'm going to say it because it matters, and I don't care that. But it isn't just a silly defiance that we all know when we either have children or are being childish ourselves. We're just being defined for the sake of being defined. It comes from a bedrock of knowing something that really matters. And I think one of the gifts maybe is a complicated word because it implies somebody's involved in giving you a terrible year. I hope to God it's not the case. But one of the after effects or the possibilities or the invitations of a difficult time is that you can do some spiritual reflection to go, well, why is this difficult? What is it that's being threatened or challenged or simply not present in that? And I think that can be a way to have a relationship with the difficulty, not in any way to just say, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm sure it does when a life's difficult. But there is an invitation in prayer to say, what can I learn? What's the information that's coming to me about what is clearly important because it's been upset and that has had an effect on me or our civic life. There's poetry about himself in his writing, and he has a real love of little threads and motifs that are woven the whole way throughout the text. It's really, really quite beautiful. And in John's Gospel, when Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, it's around a charcoal fire, for instance, and it's said that it's a charcoal fire. And here we have that lovely line in verse 9, when they had gone ashore they saw a charcoal fire lit there with fish on it. And it's just a piece of poetry. It's beautiful, but it's one of the characteristics of John, is to just let those things weave in and out, and it's a demonstration of art, and that these texts, it's a really relevant thing to encounter these as art, as not just, oh, they happen also to be art, but perhaps art is why they're sacred, because they're woven together with the dexterity and sophistication of poetry. And Jesus says 3 times to him to do you love me, in the same way that he had denied 3 times that he had love. And I always love that Peter says, it says, where is it? Peter felt hurt because he had said to him a 3rd time, do you love me? I used to read that, and I'm not about to propose the only way you can read it, but I used to read that in a way to say, he's like, stop asking me to repeat myself. But I used to read it like that, but now I think that Peter is realising, oh, he's creating a tableau for me to redeem myself. He's saying to me, I know what you did. And he's bringing me back into, to bring in the Leonard Cohen idea, he's saying the heart of the darkness is the place where you'll encounter what you need to encounter. And the heart of the darkness, the heart of the night for you, was your denial at my time of need. And I'm being good enough to you to say, let's go back. And he's creating that. And then Peter goes, oh, you know everything. I don't think that's a statement of, you are omniscient. You know, I now have a theology about you. I think he's saying, you know everything about me. And if you look at Peter's responses to other situations of his life, Peter usually has a few words to say. You know, he's a delightful character, really. Probably annoying also, but he's got so much roundness to him in terms of a biblical character. And I love that Peter here isn't looking for the miracle. He's not looking for the walking on the water. He's not looking. He knows what's important, and what Jesus is saying is important. Is that Jesus is saying, you need to come to terms with your relationship with blame, because your relationship with blame and sadness might kill you. And I want you to die in a different way. But I think Peter was in a situation that because he felt out of control, he went out of control. And Jesus is inviting him to a way to say, you will be out of control, but you can do this in a different way. Because there's this reassurance of a deep bedrock of love. And we have the carpenter here, if what you think that Jesus is a carpenter, you know, speaking words about farming to a fisherman. There's a lovely mixed metaphor. If this were a poem, you know, a creative writing teacher would just go, it's shit, get rid of, like, well, you can't have 3 metaphors interrupting each other here. But it's a lovely thing that does happen. Fisher people, farming people, and carpentry all there together, these characters. Peter, I think, is being invited into saying, the world might get darker, you know. And I think, I certainly am finishing 2016 looking at what has been given airplay and time in public politics, and hearing some of the things that have been tolerable by civic leaders, and becoming concerned to go, gosh, the advances that I thought were making life safer for those for whom life isn't safe have not been nearly as substantial as I'd hoped they were. We have demonstrated that large swathes of men want to say it doesn't matter if somebody is speaking about being invasive of a woman's body, in terms of what Trump has been saying. Large swathes of people, women and men, are wanting to say that doesn't matter as much as other things. And that, to my mind, is a real shock. And it bothers me to go, oh right, gosh, we are 20 steps further back than where we thought we were. It bothers me that in the United States the Vice President said that you should direct monies away from HIV and AIDS care to preventing the problem, which he saw as reparative therapy programs to prevent people being gay, to cure them. That's a deep problem for me to think that. And what I think is happening here with Peter is that Peter is being told love and having a relationship of self-forgiveness, a relationship with your own capacity to not even live from your own best self, will help you to live in a world where you are not in control. Somebody else will tie a belt around you and will take you where you don't want to go. But love is still going to be the thing that might sustain you. And I don't think that's the perfect antidote. It doesn't say, and therefore here's how you overthrow the darkness, and here's how you overthrow, and it doesn't say that you shouldn't do that. But I do think it gives you a way to feel sustained in the heart of your own darkness, that there, even there, is love also. And that's what we're called to turn towards, and to turn towards that in ourselves, and to turn towards that saying, even if that is a small corner of hell, well then that too has been populated by the presence of God in the body of Jesus, wandering around hell, looking for friends who felt lost. And that Jesus is being so very deliberate to say, yes, I know. As a psychological character, one of his real pet peeves was comparisons. I'd like to write an essay about it sometime. The various ways across the 4 texts where Jesus, when people are comparing, Jesus just seems to get very annoyed. And you see it even here, you know, what about him? It's like, oh, for God's sake, like, if I want him to live till, you know, whatever. And you do see the human tendency to comparing your value based on a comparison with the role or the specialness of somebody else. And I think that just annoyed Jesus. And it's a very human part of Jesus that we see in terms of a characteristic. And so therefore I think there's something very divine about interrupting the part of ourself that is addicted to comparison. We have a television system and a fame system at the moment that is addicted to that. But it's been around a long time. It's nothing new. Facebook just makes, and reality TV has just given it a new face, but it doesn't matter. There'll be another new face in 20 years' time. There was a face of this 2,000 years ago too.
And it's so natural as well.
What's that?
And that's it, and it's so natural as well, just thinking of my own children.
Yeah.
This constant comparison, and
Yeah,
she's got something that I don't have, and
totally.
you know,
It's right, yes.
she might be 2 years older than me, and but I still think my work's shit compared to hers, and you know, it's,
I know.
yeah, it just seems to be built in almost
It
comparison
does,
and
doesn't it?
fighting for attention, and built into their whole sort of self-worth, and
I wonder
it's a
sometimes if,
minefield.
yeah, it is. I wonder sometimes if that's original sin, comparison, because I've rarely seen it do anything good. I think there is something for us in terms of having a relationship with self, and what Jesus does to Peter is to force him into that, and his relationship with himself that he needed at that moment was to return to a charcoal fire and to be guided there in that sense, to have a redeeming encounter and also a self-forgiving encounter. I think there's something in this. It's clear that Jesus is pretty much at ease, like he's already been cooking for him. It's a lovely forgiving kind of tableau that's created. I think Jesus is interested in Peter getting over himself, and Peter coming to a relationship with that, where he can feel that even if the world is going to get more difficult for me, that he can have a warm and rich and wise and loving relationship with his own heart and with Jesus that can help him to be present in that. Because if he is going to engage in the rot of self-hatred and the rot of escapism, I'm going fishing, I'm going this, I'm going that, you know, whatever that would turn into for you, that won't help you live in a world that's getting worse, if the world is getting worse, if it has been a shit year. What will help is a sense of going, I can walk with a friend into the darkness and face myself and find the forgiveness that's there waiting for me, and also waiting for me to be able to be generous with that with others, because it might be that you have the capacity to meet some people who have contributed to your year being difficult and you having a deep relationship with your own sense of who you are in that space in the night will help you to contribute to the redemption of that year, in terms of your relationship with the person who might be to blame, and they really might be, or whatever the circumstances are. I think Jesus is saying something very, very interesting to all of us in terms of a difficult year where we are being taken, like he says to Peter, by the belt, Stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. This year has taken many places where you do not wish to go. If you think, I don't know how conscious in people's minds the pain and the exhaustion and the bewilderment of Brexit is to people in the north of Ireland. Once again, people on another island voting in a way that affects borders on our island, freedom of movement, farms that are divided, a peace that was absolutely built on civic provision of Irish and British passports for everybody born there. And now the EU are, in all likelihood, going to rescind the possibility of people